You're listening to The Streaming Wars, the podcast that discusses all of the latest happenings regarding your favorite streaming services. Find out which service is winning the war this time around.
Hello everyone and welcome to the latest episode of The Streaming Wars. I'm Dustin, and joining me as usual is Tony, and today we are here to talk about Apple TV Plus. In the last couple episodes, we've talked about Netflix and Amazon, and as we move forward through the current state of the streaming services, we'll be getting to a lot of the other ones. But this time around, we're talking about Apple TV Plus, and specifically the reason why is because Apple TV Plus is the next one that will actually be launching as the main ones that we are covering here on the Streaming Wars. Amazon and Netflix have been around and been in the game for quite some time, but there's a new slew of services coming very soon, and Apple TV Plus is launching on November 1st, and it will have just a little bit of a jump on Disney Plus, and then a couple months jump on the rest of the services that we're going to be covering in depth, Peacock and HBO Max. So, Apple TV Plus. Apple has been a company that is a behemoth, and I'm going to just real briefly do a quick disclaimer, which is this. My history with Apple is not exactly the most ideal for someone who's obviously talking about Apple as a company, specifically because when Apple started to get really, really big in the mid-2000s, I was one of those people who I wanted to be contrary for the sake of being contrary. iPods were blowing up, getting super popular. Then they introduced the iPhone, and I just did not want to jump on the bandwagon. I just refused to be one of the people who was jumping on the Apple bandwagon. My wife, on the other hand, was all in. We had an iMac, we got a MacBook, we had an iPad, we had an iPhone, she never had an iPhone, but we had iPods.
So it seems like you lost that battle in the house.
Oh, well, we lost the battle in the house, but I mean, we always had our separate stuff. I'm still a PC guy by nature, but it really came down to, I just did not want to be an Apple person. And there was no real reason for it other than I just wanted to go against the grain. I've always very much been the type of person who wants to go against the grain, and at the time, going against the grain was not doing Apple. The other part of it was where I was living at the time. AT&T, obviously, as most people know, was the original carrier for the iPhone, and yeah. I had AT&T as a carrier, and where I lived, I actually received a letter in the mail that said, hey, we appreciate you as a customer, but you need to go find another carrier because we're no longer going to be covering you in your area. And it was basically, I had moved there, I had lived there for over a year, and they basically said, we need you to leave because you've been under roaming this entire time, and while you are not having to pay extra because you have nationwide, we are not going to cover you. So this was before the iPhone actually launched and all of that. It was only a matter of time before AT&T came back to the area, but I was also very upset with AT&T because I basically had to leave a company that I was very happy with at the time because of that. So it was a lot of snowballing into a bigger thing, but it really just came down to I just didn't want to be an Apple person. I didn't want to have to relearn all the kinds of technology, and I was very much being an old grumpy old man, and I was only in my 20s. So so it really just came down to that. So when we're talking about Apple, I have to be upfront. I haven't kept up with Apple other than just, the broader picture of things. I know when there's the new phones, and I know when there's the keynotes that they have, and I know that, when they announce things, but for the most part, I don't keep up on a normal basis with everything going on with Apple just because I don't keep up because I don't have any of the Apple technology. So I wanted to preface everything we're saying here because my information, this is the company that I probably know the least about compared to all the other companies that are out there. It's the company I personally have the least experience with because it's the company I've had the least interaction with outside of just the general knowledge area of, staying in tune with technology and business and things like that. So I just wanted to make sure I say that up front. So Tony, what's your history with Apple? Because you're probably you might be a better person to talk about it.
Yeah. Right on the floor next to me is my MacBook Pro. Sitting on the couch right beside me is my iPhone. I have an iPad in my bedroom. So I have used Apple for a very long time. So I get the whole point of bandwagons. I was that guy of anti-bandwagon, and at the time it was Game of Thrones that was the craze, and I was so wrong on not getting on the Game of Thrones hype until like 2 years ago. I was really upset with myself. Apple, I've had a long time using it. I always found the computers very slick. I always wanted an iPod. At the time it was the iPod Classic, which at that time was not that cool, but now they've kind of become retro and they're actually worth something, which is interesting. When the iPod Touch came out, I think it was in junior high, and I realized how different that was from anything that I've seen, phone-wise, or portable handheld computers, Palm Pilots. That's very old school, type thing going on. It can do a lot. And my friend, he jailbroke his. It was first or second generation. You can jailbreak things, and all these cool apps. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, this is the future. The touchscreen is amazing. My brother had this crappy Windows phone, and it just didn't. It was a piece of crap. And seeing this iPod Touch, seeing how beautiful it was, simple and innovative, I'm like, okay, that's the future. And Apple really changed the world with their iPod, and then add iTunes with that. The kind of a package deal. They changed the music world. Their company had new life because of the iPod. And so when the iPhone came out, once again, it put Apple in a totally different gear. It set up AT&T for success because I think at the time AT&T was they weren't awful, but they could have used a little bit more business. And having that exclusive deal with Apple for a couple years, really helped them out. I was a Verizon customer. When the iPhone came out, I wasn't allowed to have phones. Two, my family was a Verizon family. It was the best service in our area, and that was always frustrating. How the most innovative phone for Verizon was the BlackBerry Touch or Storm or whatever, and then for AT&T it was the iPhone. But that doesn't really matter. Yeah, I've used Macs all throughout my time. I'm also a audio engineer, and so sometimes in the creative side of professional sound and professional video editing, having a Mac is very useful. Some of the programs work a little bit better. I have special software on my Mac that can help do different things that it's hard to get on a PC. So yeah, Apple. I've had a long experience, but a good experience. I totally get the bandwagon thing. I'm stuck with the Apple ecosystem just because I've just bought apps with Apple. I'm not a super diehard Apple person, but yeah, I totally understand it. Yeah, so in comparison to Dustin, my history with Apple is more positive and bright.
Yeah, basically the complete 180 from me.
Yes.
But yeah, so I mean, it really just, the thing is, I completely. Years ago, I worked at Best Buy for a brief time, and I sold computers, and anybody who came in who was looking to do stuff creatively, we'd always try to sell them Apple computers because they came with preloaded software that was way above beyond anything that you would be getting on PC, but on top of that, you'd have to pay extra for it on a PC. And the thing is, I completely understand the fundamental reasons of why Apple computers are better than PC and how PC computers can be better in certain aspects. Mostly it comes down to price and the affordability when it comes to large scale amounts of computers for businesses and things like that. I see the differences and I understand the differences. It was just, like I said, it was really just that bandwagon thing. I just didn't want to get on it. Eventually, while my wife got into it and things like that, the one thing that we just never got into was the iPhones. But the iPhone really did change the entire idea of what a cell phone could be and things like that. And kind of going back to what you were saying, the iPod really changed the entire market and because it started with the iPod and iTunes. And eventually, when you look at the history of iTunes, it obviously still exists to this day, but iTunes has slowly morphed and transformed and become larger. And now when you look at Apple TV Plus, this is the version of, not iTunes specifically, obviously, because iTunes is still there. You can still buy music and movies and TV shows and things like that on iTunes. But when you look at the path of Apple getting to Apple TV Plus, iTunes is definitely at the beginning of that path.
Well, you could say that Apple TV is like the founding father of streaming. Yeah, it's a streaming wars. We're supposed to tie everything together. But if you think about it, like, okay, there's Napster, but no one really cares. But if you wanted music at the time, right, it's either, CDs or vinyls. But yeah, vinyls and CDs, that's only how you, tapes. Sorry about that for that generation. So you only have like 3 mediums to get music, and they're all, physical copies. And iTunes was the most popular, most successful way to buy MP3s on demand. And then from there, it was probably the only place you can buy movies on demand too for a while, because there was no Vudu, there was no Movies Anywhere, you know what I mean? And so you had that, it kind of began that culture of, I want it now and I can get it digitally. And then from there, you had iTunes, then you had Spotify, which did music streaming. And then you had iTunes Movies, and then you had Netflix. So, Apple's really kind of, it's got its fingers in a bunch of different areas.
Yeah, and the Apple TV, the idea of the Apple TV, the whole intent of it was to basically be a device that could connect to television so that you could watch your shows that you purchased through iTunes somewhere besides your mobile devices, your iPods, and your computers. So Apple TV has existed since 2007 when they first introduced the first TV device, and it's upgraded, and there was I remember a couple years back in 2017 when they released the 4K version of it. There was a lot of people who made a really big deal about how cool that was. Because it was the first device that really got into making sure that you could stream 4K, and then 4K. And while 4K had been popular prior to 2017, there wasn't any streaming devices that were, able to do that. There were ones that could do HD, which would be 1080p, but not 4K itself. So definitely, when you look at it, they designed this to be a device. Apple TV originally was a device so that you could watch your content that you would be purchasing on iTunes, and also obviously listen to your music on a TV as well. It is now morphed into a device that will also be able to provide exclusive content, not exclusive specifically to Apple TV products or Apple devices, but Apple TV is now going to be able to have Apple TV Plus on it. And one of the things one of the things I remember hearing about first when they announced Apple TV Plus was, I assumed that it was going to be a service that you had to have the Apple TV device in order to actually use the app, or you had to have an Apple device in general. And it was just me not understanding at the time when they first announced it, because I couldn't comprehend the idea of them having an app on other services. Mostly because anytime you try to use iTunes on, any Android device or something like that, not specifically now, but back in the day, they were real hellbent about not having their software be able to be on other devices that were not their branded stuff in general. And the thing is, so my original assumption was, why would they launch a service that only Apple customers can use? It just doesn't make any sense. And through as time progressed, I found out and researched and found out that it's going to be actually available on a multitude of devices, including Roku's, and it'll be available on app stores on certain smart TVs and things like that. So it's not a matter of that, but it does show that Apple had to adjust their theory too, because they were always so content with having their software specifically on their own devices.
Well, that was Apple's, obsession, I guess you want to say, with their software has to be on their machines. And so it's, optimized and whatever to play well with just Apple. And for a long time, Apple, even computer parts were not standardized with the rest of the PC market. You couldn't, one thing, there weren't equivalent things. You can't buy some PC chip and put it in an Apple product. Now you can sort of, but yeah, for the longest time, they had this weird obsession about keeping everything in-house, and you can't do that now. I mean, I have a Roku, and I remember earlier you saying that you have a Roku. People have different ways how they stream. I know a lot of people have Samsung TVs that have essentially the basic Apple TV functionality of you can have these different apps and Netflix and Hulu and the HBO that you could show up in. There's no way that Apple, if they want to get into this new age, right, streaming, I want content everywhere, phone, iPad, computer, smart TV, hell, probably even the iWatch. There's probably going to be a new update where I can watch like Netflix on my iWatch. They have to be global. They have to be flexible. It's software companies. It's about the software, not the hardware anymore. And it's when you watch Apple and the progression, we are seeing them move away from a purely just hardware focused to trying to get into the more services oriented. Because iPhone sales are slowing. I mean, there was a report saying, a forecast report saying that iPhone sales will decline in 2019 by like around 5%. And even still, if they just, keep the same, then for the longest time, Apple was the golden child just because they sold iPhones left and right. Well, now everyone has smartphones, either some Android phone or an iPhone, and it might not be worth to upgrade for spend $1,000. So they can't, Apple can't rest on its, iPhone to take it to glory. It has to diversify. It has to move out to software. And I mean, Microsoft, they had a rough transition between going all hardware focused, stuff to now way more software focused cloud computing and stuff like that. And so this is Apple's truly first really big change from we're just making hardware products that, everyone loves to, hey, we're going to have a service and we're building off these services. And, here we're going. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. It really just, like you said, it comes down to being able to advance into different areas of the market and offer your products or your products or services specifically to people who don't necessarily use your products. And I understand the idea of a company wanting to push all of their stuff, keep everything within the same ecosystem. It's just better for them as a company, especially if you have high quality products and high quality services, because you're going to be making a lot more money than if you're offering it elsewhere. But at the same time, you can't really expand if you don't figure out a way to get into those other markets that are using your products. So it's a smart way to do it. So Apple TV Plus, let's talk more about this. So So specifically, obviously, Apple TV Plus, owned by Apple. Just running down the bare facts, like we've talked about for some of these other companies. The current value for Apple is $365 billion. Their stock price is sitting somewhere in the neighborhood of $216 as of this recording, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Apple is the second most cash-rich company in the world.
Yes. And
crazy.
While they obviously have lots of different things that they offer, a lot of what they have is a lot of the money that they've made is on hardware. And we know that hardware is something that you can make a lot of money on, but as time progresses, you have to figure out ways to diversify your revenue stream, because hardware doesn't last forever, in the sense of there's only so many people who can purchase your product, and then you've plateaued. And Apple is now doing a lot more things outside of just the hardware side of things, and Apple TV Plus is one of them. So obviously, as of right now, there are 0 subscribers because the service hasn't actually launched. There might be people who have signed up for it ahead of time. I don't know that they're doing I'm sure they are, but I haven't looked into it. As far as a pre-sale of whether or not you can pre-order it.
There is. You could think it's like either 3 months or a year, but to go a little bit at probably where you're going, if you get the new iPhones or iDevices, you'll get a year subscription worth. So there's kind of both avenues of getting it early.
Yes, and that is something I'll get back to in a second. But real quick, just finishing up the things. The price is going to be $4.99 per month. But the real catch, of course, is that when it launches, there will only be 9 original programs that it will launch with. Their release plan is going to be unlike Netflix and Amazon, where they drop everything at once. They will be releasing 3 episodes on launch day, or the day of the launch for the show, as the service continues on, and then they will be releasing a lot of shows weekly. There will be some shows that they've said that they'll release all at once, but they're not being specific about any of them. But the initial shows that they have, they're planning on just releasing 3 episodes to kind of get people interested, and then they'll be releasing on a weekly schedule. So this goes against the model of binge watching, but at the same time, it also keeps people from subscribing for the free 7-day trial and then binge watching anything that they want to watch and then, leaving the service. Now, it's not to say that eventually when the show eventually runs its course and the first seasons are done that people won't do that, because I'm sure there will be people who will do that. But going back, before we get into the content side of things, I want to talk about this situation that you mentioned about Apple devices getting a free year of the service. So I was reading some reports. So obviously in September, when they had their latest event, the Apple event, where they talked a little bit more details about Apple TV Plus, and they announced the iPhone 11 and all of that, they talked and announced that anybody who buys a new Apple product this year will get a free year of Apple TV Plus. Now, a lot of the articles that I was reading at the time were specifically saying this could have a direct reasoning behind this is so that Apple can fluff their subscriber numbers for the first year to warrant the continuation of the service, so that stockholders don't get weary if the service doesn't pick up as quickly as it would, because it is competing so much with so many other services that have much more content at release. So I wanted to get your take on whether or not you think that's a true idea, that they could actually, that is a reason of why they're doing it, or do you think that there's other reasons behind it?
This is I know the answer to this question, but this is a leading question. Is there going to be any other content, any other shows that I can watch because of Apple TV?
No, there will not be.
Any other licensed content like some of these other companies?
No, and that is the thing that makes them the most different than any other service that we'll be releasing. Between Netflix, Amazon, Peacock, HBO Max, Disney Plus, all of those services are launching, and they will have a massive, they're launching, or they're already existing with a massive back catalog of content other than their original programming. Netflix has licensing deals with multiple companies. All of the other companies that are launching a service, they all have licensing in place where they have, HBO Max is boasting that they're going to have 10,000 hours of content from their back catalog, plus they'll have original programming. Apple, on the other hand, will have nothing but the original programming. They will not have any licensing deals in place. They do not have any licensing deals in place to provide any shows or movies for the initial launch of Apple TV, which is also probably why it's $4.99 a month.
Yeah, so all that is going to affect my decision of, I at first thought the $4.99 price was ridiculous. Yeah, Disney Plus was $6.99. I thought that was crazy. That was crazy low, because Netflix, I think I spend like $12 a month, and that's the lowest tier. I know HBO Max is not, around $6. Hulu is more expensive than that. Disney really shook up the market. But Apple, what a low price. And I was shocked when I heard it from their conference, the conference. But then the more I think about it, it's okay. It's $4.99 a month for pretty much 9 shows, even with more in development. You're not going to get, you can only have so many different shows in development. They're only going to last for 10 episodes. And the only thing to sell me on these shows is either word of mouth, I buy a new iPhone, or the commercials that I see on TV and other streaming services. I'm not convinced that this is going to be a successful service. And I'm not the Apple skeptic here. I really worry about Apple, and I feel like they're getting into the game too quickly. I'm worried that this is going to fail for them, and it shouldn't have to fail. If it's Apple, they usually get a lot of different things, and given their relationships because of iTunes with all these different media companies, from music to video, they would have great opportunities to develop licensing deals and partnerships and other types of relationships with these companies for streaming content. But you're going to ask me to pay $4.99 for 9 shows that I'm really not that interested in? Of course, I'm tying a year's worth subscription with new iPhone sales. Of course, it's going to inflate numbers. And yeah, part of that, it might be, I'm trying to find a more diplomatic way to say, lie, I guess, to the shareholders. They're not lying, but, misrepresenting the facts to the shareholders. But it might be Apple's best strategy to make, pick up subscribers. It's throw everything against the wall and see who's gonna, see who's gonna stick around. Because maybe in a year they have good content. Maybe in a year people will, sign up for it. Maybe in a year they're gonna be like, you know what, that wasn't that bad. It's only $5. Add that to my Apple Music subscription and we'll be fine. But if they don't, the stuff that I've seen, and yeah, they have big name talent, like really big name talent. I think Apple's only way to survive is to have to pair it with Apple, product devices, sales, which, let's just be honest, let's just condense that all down to iPhone sales. There's Macs and iPads, but if you want to look at, how many units that they sell, it's mostly iPhones. And I had a chart from 2018 and how many iPhones that they sold, because the 2019 iPhone literally just got announced like 3 weeks ago. So there are pre-orders, but there are no true sales numbers yet for especially Q3. But for 2018, it sold 217 million iPhones, and this is worldwide. And to take that into account to Apple TV being released worldwide, man, I can't say that word, worldwide, as well, that's a large amount of people getting new iPhones, and they're going to get a year's worth subscription to Apple TV. Dustin, that's a lot of subscribers. That's a great amount of subscribers. 217 million, that tops, potentially if everyone subscribes, it's going to top, Netflix and Amazon. So yeah, it's going to inflate the numbers. I think it's a great marketing ploy. I think it's a great way to say that, hey, we have growth. I think it's a great way to say that, trust in us because we will have growth, because, there's 217 million people who are going to potentially be seeing the streaming service have a conversion rate of, 7%, even like 15%. That's a large number. And, it's banking on a lot of hope. It's banking on a lot of people going to keep their subscriptions. It's going to bank on Apple's, creative side to figure out, okay, what shows actually work. It's going to come down to what famous actors they can get and writers they can get, because we're going to know the direction of Apple and their creative content and where they're going to go in about 10 weeks. We'll know when these series end. Okay, how are these series unfolding? What's Apple's strategy? Because Netflix has a strategy, Amazon has a strategy. HBO, like actual HBO, has a certain strategy for its shows, and then HBO Max is going to be a different thing, but we'll talk about that later. Right? They have this different structures for the shows, and we know what's going to expect. They top quality reviews. People want to work with them. After these 10 episodes, we'll see if celebrities want to put their name and sign their name to some of these contracts with Apple, because it's like, not many people are going to see it. They're not winning awards. Is it worth my time to put my name with Apple when I could be spending, that time and potentially get that money from Amazon, Hulu, Netflix, Disney? You know what I mean? So Apple TV Plus is just writing a bunch of, promises to their shoulders that, hey, maybe potentially this is going to work. We're going to hope it's going to work. Come back to us in a year. Trust us. I'm just unsure. It's a long answer. I'm unsure.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing is I don't know that anybody out there can be sure about how successful Apple TV Plus can be at this point in time. I mean, like you said, let's just say there was 200 million people who bought an iPhone and they all get Apple TV. Even so after a year passes, if they they have to give their information, just like any free trial, essentially, you have to give your information. Even if, let's say, 15% of those people actually stay on and keep paying for Apple TV Plus after the first year, that's still 30 million subscribers that Apple TV would have after the first year. And that would be a really, really huge number, considering Amazon has 100 million, Netflix has 155. That would be a lot of subscribers initially. So it is, like you said, a really, really good marketing ploy to get people to just have access to the service, especially in these early days when the service is slowly building its content library, slowly releasing stuff. I mean, the biggest thing, the thing that worries me probably more than anything is they're launching with 9 shows. None of the shows that are announced at this point say that they have more than 10 episodes, although there are a couple of them that nobody knows exactly how many of there are, but a lot of those shows that people don't know how many episodes are the shows that have they're the family shows. But the specific dramas and the comedies that are more adult oriented in the sense of they're geared towards adults, not children, they don't have more than 10 episodes per season. Even if they had 13 episodes per season, like I'm seeing a show called Central Park, which they describe as an animated musical comedy. It says there's 26 episodes spread out over 2 seasons. So you would assume
what?
Central Park, and it's an animated musical comedy. It's not one of the ones that's releasing up front. It's just under the list of stuff that they've ordered to series that's coming at some point.
So you said musical animated comedy.
Correct.
And it just threw me off. I'm definitely not going to buy the service now. What in the world?
I mean, the thing is, like, they are definitely trying to go all over the place. To be fair, like you said, there was nothing that you were really interested in. There was 2 shows at launch that I am really, really interested in seeing. I want to see the morning show because of the talent that's involved with Steve Carell, Jennifer Aniston, Reese Witherspoon. I want to see the For All Mankind, which reminds me a lot of Man in High Castle, but from this, instead of World War II, it's about the space race, and I am a huge space race nut when it comes to that stuff. I walk around in NASA shirts like 90% of the time. Anytime I see a new NASA shirt at the store, I pick it up.
Nerd.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry.
That's okay. I mean, I'm pretty sure we're all nerds, and a lot of our listeners are nerds too. So, no, but the show's called For All Mankind, and it's a show that I'm really interested in seeing because it basically, the premise of the show is, what if Russia got to the moon first and America didn't? And America decides that they're going to kind of shift their focus to be able to do something else that's the first. And they go from having all of these male astronauts to saying, we're going to put the first female on the moon. So they bring in all these female pilots to basically train to be astronauts, and because of the time frame of the 60s and the early 70s, them dealing with some of this stuff and seeing how the cultural differences between the time frames that these things are taking place in and the roles that women had at the time, seeing how that clashes with society. That's what I'm really interested in seeing. And to be fair, originally their whole premise and what they were really pushing was the fact that, Russia just got to the moon first. Now what? But as they released the full trailer, it revealed the aspects about the female astronauts going to the moon. And I think that'll be really interesting. So those 2 shows I'm really interested in. To be fair, a lot of the other shows, Dickinson, the Oprah Book Club show, none of those shows I'm super interested in. As far as the kids shows, the only one that I would probably be interested in watching with my kids would be the Snoopy in Space because I like the Peanuts. But that's it. I know what Ghost Rider is. It's a show that was on in the 90s, but I never really got into it. And then there's a show that's called Helpsters, which is from the Sesame Workshop, the same people who make Sesame Street. They're doing their own puppet show for Apple that has none of the characters from Sesame Street. It's its own new band of characters, but I'm not interested in any of those. There's another show that I know that's down in the pipeline that doesn't have a release date as now, which is called Amazing Stories. This is from Steven Spielberg, and this is a project that is kind of not a reboot or anything like that, but a revitalization of an anthology series that he had in the late 80s, early 90s that I watched with my dad that I really liked. And it was basically like if you took, in the same vein of like Black Mirror or Twilight Zone, but not horror and not twisted. It was just these standalone stories that sometimes had supernatural or magical elements to the story, but nothing that would be... It was a very family-friendly anthology series. I'll just put it that way. That one's another one that I've heard things, that I know that's coming that I'm interested in. But honestly, looking through all of the other stuff that they have, while I'm sure there might be something else that might pop up here or there as trailers get released for it, nothing super standing out to me as I'm super interested in. They have signed a lot of really big names to work on content. There's a Brie Larson CIA drama series at some point. There's Oprah Winfrey has a bunch of different projects that she's working on over there.
Chris Evans is in a show.
Yeah, and then Simon Kinberg, who he wrote a lot of the X-Men films and has also directed some. He's working on a series over there, a science fiction series. So there's a lot of different creators that are attached to this. So they clearly have the money to put to, quality creators and things like that. And clearly they're going in the vein of trying to create content like HBO. They're not in the vein of trying to create content like Netflix, where they're throwing a ton of stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. It clearly is they're trying to create quality content in the vein of like Amazon, where they're not creating a ton of content. They're trying to create really good content. The problem, of course, is when you don't have a back catalog of licensed properties is part of your content library as a benefit to, basically enhance what you're giving your customers. How many customers who are not Apple device holders are actually going to be signing up for the service? I mean, while I'm interested, like I said, in like a couple of these series, I'm not going to pay $5 a month so that I can watch 2 or 3 series. It's just not going to happen. If I'm going to, subscribe to something, it's going to be something that not only can I watch new stuff that I'm interested in, but also a bunch of other stuff that I'd like to watch from the past as well. And at this point, Apple just doesn't have the content to warrant me to subscribe. Now, that's not to say that I will not subscribe at some point in the future, because I do want to see some of these series, but it's not something that I'm immediately drawn to. It's not like Disney, where I'm seeing that they've got original content, they've got a slew of original content they're creating, and I'm really interested in it, so I'm going to sign up for it right away. It's not the same situation. So it'll be interesting to see what ends up happening with Apple TV Plus, because while I think that it could eventually become something really, really good, it's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of money putting it, Apple putting a lot of money to the service, and it's going to take time. Yeah. And they've got the money and they've got the time, as long as they keep doing this, as long as they're able to, kind of prop up their subscriber numbers with the people who are signing up with the free trial for a year. I think they'll have the time. They clearly have the money. So it's just a matter of wait and see, in my opinion.
They can outspend pretty much everyone, maybe besides Amazon, just because they have, as we talked about last episode, they have other businesses that can help them cover costs, but they could pretty much outspend every other streaming, provider for streaming service, for, people, for rights to the different shows that they want, like buying the rights from like Sundance festivals and stuff like that. They can outspend anyone they want to. And between, outspending, getting very well-known people. Yeah, I realized looking at another article, there's like an M. Night Shyamalan series that evidently had like a very creepy trailer that was really released today or yesterday. That, M. Night Shyamalan, I don't like him, but there are a large amount of people who do like him, and they have lots of money, big names, and they're banking on winning some awards. So if they can win, a couple Oscars, winning a couple films that, the Toronto Film Festival or the Sundance Film Festival, if they can, get their name out that way, then people will start to, paying attention, because it's like, oh, okay, well, it won an Oscar. Well, obviously I'm going to pay attention to that. It's won an Emmy. I'm going to pay attention to that. So that's Apple's strategy, and I wouldn't be comfortable, if I ran the business, I'm just hoping on a bunch of prayers. But once again, I'm not an executive at Apple.
And the thing is, they have it's just the overall idea of what it is interesting. Like, we were talking about this a couple weeks ago about how Apple has more money, like you said, than anybody else. But they also, even though they have the money, it's not like they're going just willy-nilly spending money everywhere either. They're very particular about what they're spending money on. There's actual series that they've actually shelved that they originally planned on doing. There was something that I read specifically that the programming that's getting like approved, a lot of it has to do with Tim Cook and his personal values and what he looks for. It's not like they have a bunch of people who are looking for what's just truly successful. It's, modeled after his stuff. So there was, they're trying to stick to very family friendly programming in the sense of there's some of the stuff. I know that there was an article which I don't have the link to, unfortunately, for the show notes, because this was a while ago that I read this, but the morning show had elements that they specifically told them to pull out. The M. Night Shyamalan had some crucifixes that they were told that they needed to remove from the series. There's just some different weird things that they specifically told, Apple is telling their creators, hey, we want you to be here. We're going to pay you a bunch of money, but we're going to have a lot of oversight on what you're actually putting out. And
well, just imagine if Steve Jobs was still alive. I mean, Tim Cook is, Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, but Steve Jobs is extremely detail focused. I mean, he complained about how the inside of Apple laptops and Apple computers, if the insides were messy, configuration, if they weren't clean, if they weren't simple, if they weren't beautiful, then he yelled at his engineers for the inside of the computer that has chips and boring stuff that no one would ever care about. And okay, that needs to be beautiful. Just imagine visual content, hey, Apple's going to put its name to movies. He would be so involved, it would even be funny. I don't even know how to describe what Apple TV would be with Steve Jobs running it, and if they could get any shows off the ground, just because he would be all up in those productions. And, I want this, this is the Apple way. It needs to be beautiful. And that'd be interesting to see what would happen with Steve Jobs.
Yeah. So anyway, Apple TV Plus launches on November 1st, $4.99 if you are not purchasing any new Apple products in the near future, and you'll get 9 shows at launch. So next time around, we're going to be talking about Disney Plus, which is the next service that will also be launching in November, and we'll be talking about the content that's coming with that, along with the service as a whole and Disney as a company. There's a lot more to talk about with that service because there's a lot more content that Disney has, because Disney is a traditional entertainment media company, unlike Apple, which is a software and hardware company traditionally. So with that being said, for Tony and myself, we appreciate you guys listening to this latest episode of the Streaming Wars. Real quick mention, if you are so inclined, we do have a Patreon. If you are interested in supporting us, we do have a couple of different rewards over on there. You can head over to the site, thestreamingwars.io, and there's a link to Patreon at the top of the page, as well as any show notes any of the articles that we referenced here in the podcast. We will provide those in the show notes, so you can take a look at those full articles as well. With that being said, also head over to Apple and give us, specifically because this is an Apple-centric episode, head over to iTunes and give us 5 stars. And then give us 5 stars anywhere else that you listen to the podcast as well. We greatly appreciate that. And we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks for listening to The Streaming Wars. Check us out on Twitter and Instagram. Also consider supporting us on Patreon. Links can be found at thestreamingwars.io.